My mother held up my wedding invitation like it was a certified piece of junk mail, pinched between two fingers, examined at arm's length, and then she set it back down on the kitchen table next to my sister's champagne flutes without opening the envelope all the way. I had spent 3 weeks designing that invitation. The cardstock alone cost me $40 a sheet. She didn't ask who made it, she didn't ask about the date. She just set it down and looked at me with that particular expression of hers. The one that starts around her eyes, a slow tightening, and asked if the venue was some kind of campground. That was the Sunday dinner when everything started. I am Sadie, I am 28 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life being the daughter my family treats like a placeholder, useful when they need someone to bring the potato salad, invisible when it's time to celebrate something real. I work as a forensic accountant at a mid-size firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I trace money through complicated structures for a living. I find where things don't add up. It is meticulous and quiet and deeply satisfying in a way that is very difficult to explain to people who've never done it. My fiancé Eli was the same kind of person, private, methodical. He wore flannel shirts and drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it and never once dropped a number at a dinner table to impress anyone. He had taught high school chemistry for a couple of years before he left to work on his own project full-time. When my family asked what he did now, he told them he did independent environmental consulting. My mother nodded the way she did when she was being polite to someone she'd already dismissed. My sister Brynn was the one my parents actually talked about at Sunday brunch. She was 25 and effortlessly beautiful in the way some people are, and she had just gotten engaged to a man named Stafford, who developed luxury residential properties across the Southeast. Stafford was 36 and wore custom dress shirts and drove a blacked-out Range Rover and had a habit of saying things like "our portfolio" in casual conversation, as though everyone in the room had one. My parents thought he was extraordinary. My father once called him the kind of man who makes a family mean something. I remember exactly where I was standing in that kitchen when he said it. I remember because I had just watched Eli help my father hang a section of fence in the backyard, and my father had not said one word of thanks. The Sunday dinner in question happened in late February. I had just confirmed our venue, a private mountain property that Eli owned outside of Asheville, and we had a date locked in, July 12th. I brought the invitations to the table with the genuine belief that my family would be happy for me. I was 28 years old and I still believed that. My mother looked at the return address, a rural route number outside Asheville, and asked me if this was a campground. I told her it was a mountain property Eli owned outright, that it was private and quiet, and that it was the place where we felt most like ourselves. She set the invitation down without another question. Brynn hadn't said anything yet. She was watching me with her hands folded on the table, which in my experience meant she had something carefully prepared. She announced, with the precision of a person who has rehearsed the moment, that she and Stafford had something to share. She reached into her bag and pulled out a professionally printed event card, matte finish, gold foil, weight to it, for their engagement celebration. A rooftop event at the Harrington House Hotel in Uptown Charlotte. Cocktail hour, dinner, dancing, everything the card didn't say outright, it communicated through typography alone. The date was July 12th. I looked at her. She looked back at me and said she was sorry, but the Harrington only had one Saturday available in July, and Stafford had already put down the deposit, and she was sure I could push my wedding to September since our venue was, and she paused here on purpose, flexible. I asked her how she could do this when she knew I had been planning this date for 4 months. My mother exhaled slowly and told me that a family event at a 5-star hotel was not something we could ask Stafford to reschedule. She said it the way you explain a simple fact to a slow child. She said that Eli's mountain property would still be there in September, and that honestly, late summer in the mountains was better for weather anyway. She looked genuinely helpful when she said it. My father said that Stafford had business contacts flying in specifically for this event, and that it would be an embarrassment to the whole family if they had to choose between celebrating their daughter at a campsite and attending a proper formal event in a city venue. He used the word campsite. Right to my face. Right there in his kitchen where Eli had helped him hang that fence. Eli was sitting beside me. He didn't react visibly. He placed his hand over mine under the table, and when I glanced at him, his eyes were completely calm, not resigned, not helpless, calm in the way of a person who already knows how something ends. Then Stafford leaned back and said, in his particular slow drawl, that he was sorry to hear we were struggling with the budget. He had heard the consulting business was tough these days, and that he would be happy to cover the cost of a venue upgrade for Eli and me as a gift. He slid a business card across the table with a number written on the back, $10,000. He called it the least he could do since we were, after all, almost family. I slid the card back. I told him we were more than fine. Stafford smiled the way he always did when he thought he was being gracious, and he said nobody needed to know. As if taking his money and swallowing my pride were both things I could do quietly, in private, and everyone could move on. I told him I wasn't interested in $10,000 from a man whose own financing was going to be a matter of public record before the year was out. The table went quiet. Stafford looked at me with something careful behind his eyes. He asked me what I meant by that. I told him I was a forensic accountant, that I spent my days following money through layered entities and LLC structures. I said it the way you say something when you want the other person to understand that you are not guessing. He picked the business card back up. My mother called me hostile. My father said I was sabotaging the happiest moment of my sister's life out of jealousy. Brynn didn't look happy in that moment. She looked cornered. Eli stood up when I stood up. We walked out together and I heard my mother calling after me before the front door clicked shut behind us. The next 72 hours were not pleasant. Brynn posted a photo of herself that same night, soft lighting, careful makeup, a caption about how painful it was to love someone who couldn't be happy for you. She tagged me by name. My mother's sister left me a voicemail that used the word pathetic 3 separate times. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years texted to tell me I needed to learn what family actually meant. Another cousin posted a long comment about how embarrassing it was to watch me act out when a successful man like Stafford was trying to bring our family forward. She typed those exact words. Bring our family forward. I took screenshots of everything. That is the forensic accountant in me. I do not delete evidence. What none of them knew was that they weren't the only ones building a case. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called about my grandfather's watch. My grandfather had passed 3 years earlier. He left me, specifically and by name in his will, his 1968 Rolex Submariner. He had bought it the year he came home from Vietnam and he wore it every single day of his life after that. When I was 12, he put it on my wrist and told me it was going to be mine because I reminded him of himself, quiet and careful and better at knowing things than people gave me credit for. The watch was worth somewhere around $30,000 at current appraisal. My mother had circled it like a satellite for years. She told me that Stafford wanted to wear it to the engagement party. For the photographs. She said it would mean a great deal to Brynn if the family heirloom was represented at the event. She said it with the casualness of someone asking to borrow a jacket. I told her I would drop it by. She said wonderful and hung up before I could finish the sentence. The next afternoon I drove to the coffee shop where Brynn asked to meet me. She was already there when I arrived, oversized sunglasses on indoors, designer bags on the empty chair beside her. I set a small brown leather case on the table between us and sat down with my tea. She reached for it immediately. She unclipped the latch and lifted the lid. Inside the case was a folded document, the official estate paperwork showing that the watch had been transferred into a personal property trust in my name 18 months prior. I had had it appraised and registered then because I am a forensic accountant and I had known this conversation was eventually coming. The watch itself was on my wrist. I had rolled up my sleeve before I sat down. Brynn stared at the paper, then at my wrist. She asked if I was joking. I told her Grandpa left it to me and that I was wearing it to my wedding on July 12th and that she was welcome to come see it on that day if she wanted. She did not take that well. What happened next is not something I will describe in detail, because I have more self-possession than she showed in that moment. Her voice rose in a way that made the barista pause mid-pour. She said things about me and about Eli that were untrue and ugly. She knocked over her own iced coffee getting out of her chair, and the people at the neighboring table turned openly to watch her leave. I finished my tea. I left a 20 on the table for the cleanup and walked out into the afternoon sun. Stafford was waiting for me in the parking lot. He pulled up in the Range Rover while I was unlocking my car and stepped out before I could open the door. He crossed his arms and used his height and his expensive jacket to try to make the conversation feel the way he wanted it to feel. He told me I needed to understand the position I was putting my family in. He said that humiliating Brynn in public was not something he was going to let go without consequences. I told him I had given Brynn exactly what was inside the watch case, which was the legal documentation establishing my sole ownership of a piece of property that my grandfather specifically bequeathed to me. I told him I hadn't humiliated anyone. And then I told him he should be careful using the word consequences, because I had spent the past several months reviewing a very interesting set of LLC filings, and the entity structures surrounding his southeastern development portfolio were the kind that tend to attract attention from the people who get paid to notice these things. He asked me who I thought I was. I told him I was the woman getting married on July 12th, and that he was welcome to come, but based on what I'd been reading, he might be otherwise occupied that day. I got in my car. Eli was making coffee in the kitchen when I got home, wearing the flannel shirt with the frayed left cuff that I had told him 3 times to let me replace. He asked how it went. I told him. He nodded slowly and said that the attorneys had confirmed the closing timeline, and that everything was on track for the morning of July 12th. He said it the way he said everything important. Quietly, without performance, the way someone speaks when they have nothing to prove. For 4 years, Eli had been developing a water remediation technology, a system that could strip PFAS compounds and heavy metals from contaminated groundwater at a fraction of the cost of existing methods. It was the kind of work that doesn't get you on magazine covers until suddenly it does. He had been in acquisition negotiations with a major environmental engineering firm for the better part of 2 years, $220 million. The deal was structured to close on the morning of July 12th, and when his board had asked if he wanted to shift the date, he had said, with the same quiet simplicity that characterized everything about him, that he wasn't moving his wedding. My family thought he drove an old truck because he was broke. He drove that truck because he didn't care about trucks. July 12th arrived, the way important days always do, quietly at first and then all at once. The property outside Asheville was not a campsite. It had never been a campsite. It was 460 acres of protected mountain land with a main house, a guest lodge, a restored stone terrace, and a ceremony overlook that faced a valley wide enough that people stopped talking when they first saw it. Eli had owned it for 3 years. He kept the gate unmarked because he didn't advertise anything about himself. The security team wore plain clothes. Our guests arrived through the early morning mist. These were not social climbers looking for a free glass of champagne. There were environmental scientists and civil engineers and 2 former EPA officials. There was a university president from Chapel Hill and a policy researcher who had spent her career studying water contamination in rural communities. There were people who had been quietly following Eli's work for years and who sat in the wooden chairs on the side of that mountain and watched us get married with an attention that felt closer to witness than entertainment. The ceremony was unhurried. I wore a simple bone-white dress from a boutique in Asheville, nothing extravagant, nothing that would outshine the valley. My grandfather's watch was on my left wrist. Eli wore a dark gray suit without a tie and looked exactly like himself. We said our vows just after 10 in the morning with the ridge behind us and the light coming in low and gold across the chairs. At 9:14 that same morning, the acquisition announcement had moved across the wire. $220 million. A company the financial press was already calling the most significant environmental technology deal of the decade. The founder's name, quiet, private, flannel shirts, old truck, was in every headline. Downtown Charlotte was having a different kind of morning. The Harrington House had a standard policy regarding payment authorization. The final event balance had to clear before service commenced. Stafford's corporate card was on file. It did not clear. What Stafford was doing at 9:15 in the morning was sitting in the back of a hired car, watching his investment platform return a string of account locks and an automated notice from the SEC's Division of Enforcement. Federal agents had executed simultaneous warrants on his business office and his registered financial manager that morning. The investigation had been building for 7 months. The accounts were frozen, every one of them. My family arrived at the Harrington at 10:30, dressed for the event of the season, moving through the marble lobby with the confidence of people who were expected. There was no event coordinator to greet them, there was no check-in table, there was a hotel manager near the elevator bank who informed them, with measured professionalism, that the reservation for the rooftop ballroom had been cancelled due to non-payment, and the event was not proceeding. My mother asked to speak to someone else. She was told there was no one else. Brynn arrived shortly after in her engagement party dress, strapless, elaborate, not designed for standing in a hotel lobby for an extended period of time. She looked at the closed ballroom doors and at my mother and at the cluster of relatives holding gift bags with nowhere to set them, and she did not speak for a long moment. Stafford arrived almost an hour later. He looked diminished somehow, as though he had been replaced overnight by someone smaller and more frightened wearing his clothes. He told Brynn there was a problem with the wire transfer. He says it was temporary. He used the word temporary 4 times in under 2 minutes. My cousin had already opened the news on her phone. My aunt was reading something and had gone pale. The story was fully out by then, and it was not just a story about a declined corporate card. It was a story about a development company that had been operating for the better part of 3 years as a layered fraud. Early investors' funds used to pay returns to later ones, a portion redirected into personal accounts. The SEC had been building the case since the previous fall. The Charlotte Business Journal had it. The Wall Street Journal used the word fraud in the headline. My father watched Stafford take a phone call in the far corner of the lobby. He watched his face change as the call continued. He watched Stafford lower the phone and look at the marble floor for a long moment before he found Brynn's eyes and said very quietly that he needed to go. He walked through the revolving doors and did not come back. Brynn stood in the lobby of the Harrington house in her engagement party dress and watched the door continue to turn after he had gone through it. She did not move for a long time. It was my aunt who found the news coverage. She turned her phone screen around and my mother leaned in, and they watched perhaps 40 seconds of a live network broadcast before my mother recognized the aerial footage. The green ridge, the valley, the rows of wooden chairs, the small white tent at the overlook edge, and the couple standing at the front of it. The chyron at the bottom read, "Breaking, 220 acquisition close as Asheville founder marries." The broadcast cut to a reporter standing just outside the estate's perimeter fence, speaking about the deal, about the technology, about what it meant for contaminated water systems across the country. And then the reporter said that the founder's wife, a forensic accountant, had, in the course of reviewing regional investment filings over the preceding months, compiled and forwarded to the SEC a detailed analysis of irregular fund structures in the Charlotte area real estate market, and that a related federal investigation was actively unfolding that morning. The reporter extended a microphone toward me, and I leaned in and said simply that some people spend their whole lives building the appearance of success because the appearance is all they have. I said the numbers always tell the truth, eventually. I said I was grateful to be marrying a man who had never needed to pretend to be anything other than exactly what he was. In the lobby of the Harrington house, my mother's phone went quiet. She stood there a long time holding it. She texted me at 2:17 in the afternoon from my cousin's phone, because hers was nearly dead. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said she had always loved me. She said she hoped it wasn't too late to still be part of my day. She used the word misunderstanding. As though what had happened at that kitchen table in February was a mix-up. As though the years of Sunday dinners where my father dismissed my fiancé to his face were just communication failures. As though the invitation she had held between 2 fingers like junk mail was just a lapse in judgment she regretted now that she had seen the valley on the news. The security team at our gate called up to confirm they had a group requesting entry. I was standing in the courtyard with Eli's hand in mine and a glass of water I hadn't touched, and the sun dropping behind the western ridge in long orange bands. I told them we had no additional guests on the list. I told them the gate was not opening. I took out my phone and typed back 2 words. Too late. I set the phone face down on the stone wall and did not check it again that evening. What I was told later, they stood outside the gate for a long time. My aunt cried. My father tried to speak to the security team as though authorities was something he could project into the situation, and was turned away each time with the same even patience. Brynn sat on the hood of her car and stared at the mountain and did not say anything to anyone. My mother pressed her face briefly to the iron bars, trying to see through the tree line to where the lights from the terrace were just becoming visible in the early dark. I did not know any of this until days later. By then we were in another country, and the mountain property had gone quiet, and the valley held the last of the summer light in the way it always did, without asking anyone's permission. If you are listening to this and you have a family that taught you to make yourself smaller, that required you to be lesser so their hierarchy could hold, I want you to understand something it took me a very long time to learn. The people who dismiss you are not doing it because they see you clearly. They are doing it because they need you to stay where you are so they don't have to examine what they chose not to build. My family looked at Eli and saw a man in a flannel shirt driving an old truck, and they decided, without any further investigation, that he was not worth their respect. They were wrong about that. But more importantly, they were wrong about me. They thought I needed their approval to know my own worth. They had not understood what kind of accountant I was. My grandfather's watch is still on my wrist. Eli still drives that truck in Asheville because he genuinely prefers it. The valley behind the house turns gold in the early evenings, and the quiet out there is not the quiet of something empty. It is the quiet of something that has already been decided. I hope you find that kind of quiet for yourself. And if someone in your life is calling your future a campsite, I need you to know. They just haven't seen your view yet.